would set fire to everything they thought they knew about justice, mercy, and the price of freedom. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Hannah's story travels. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't believe where this goes. The heat was a living thing. It crawled across Hannah Brennan's burned skin like something with teeth, patient and cruel, draining her 1 degree at a time. The iron bars of the cage radiated warmth even in the early morning, and by noon they'd be hot enough to blister. She'd learned that on the first day. Now, on the 5th, she'd learned to keep still, to breathe shallow, to let her mind drift somewhere far from Dust Creek and the merciless August sun beating down on the town square. The cage wasn't tall enough to stand in. It wasn't wide enough to lie flat. It was designed, she understood now, not to kill quickly, but to break slowly. To make an example. To teach the kind of lesson that stuck in people's minds long after the body was buried. Hannah pressed her cracked lips together and tasted blood. Her tongue was swollen, her throat so dry that swallowing felt like grinding glass. The wooden water bucket they'd left just outside the bars, close enough to see, far enough that her fingers couldn't reach, had been empty since yesterday. Sheriff Dolan had walked past it twice this morning, boots kicking up dust, and both times he'd smiled. "Beggar's learning," he'd said to the blacksmith, loud enough for her to hear. "This is what happens when you don't know your place." Hannah had asked for work. That was all. She'd walked into the mercantile with nothing but the clothes on her back and hunger gnawing at her ribs, and she'd asked Mrs. Pritchard if there was anything she could do. Sweep floors, stock shelves, scrub dishes, anything honest, anything that might earn her a meal. Mrs. Pritchard had looked at her the way you'd look at something tracked in on a boot. "We don't hire drifters," she'd said, "especially not your kind." Hannah hadn't understood what her kind meant until the sheriff showed up an hour later and dragged her out of the boarding house where she'd been sleeping on the floor. Vagrancy, he'd called it, begging, public nuisance. He'd locked her in the cage before sundown, and the town had gathered to watch like it was a theater performance. That first night she'd screamed herself hoarse. By the second day she'd learned that screaming only made children laugh and mothers pull their skirts aside as they passed. By the third day she'd stopped making sound at all. Now, on the 5th morning, she kept her eyes closed and tried to remember what it felt like to be clean, to drink cold water from a well, to sleep on something softer than iron bars pressing into her spine. The sound of wagon wheels on hard-packed dirt broke through the haze. Hannah didn't open her eyes. Wagons came and went all morning in Dust Creek. Freight haulers, ranch families, circuit preachers. None of them stopped. None of them asked questions. The cage had become part of the scenery, as unremarkable as the hitching posts or the faded flag hanging outside the courthouse. But this wagon slowed. She heard the brake-in gauge, heard the creak of someone climbing down, heard small voices, children's voices, high and bright and curious in a way that made her chest ache. "Papa, what's that?" "Looks like a jail, Ruthie, but smaller." "Why's it in the middle of town?" "Papa, there's someone inside." Hannah opened her eyes. The world tilted, blurred, then sharpened into focus. 5 girls stood clustered near the wagon, ranging in age from maybe 6 to 16, all of them dressed in simple calico with their hair braided neat despite the dust of the road. They stared at the cage with wide eyes. Not cruel, not mocking, just shocked in the way children get when they see something that doesn't fit the shape of the world they know. Behind them stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-30s with sun-darkened skin and the kind of hands that knew work. He wore a plain shirt rolled to the elbows, suspenders, a hat that had seen better years. His face was weathered, hard-lined, but his eyes, gray as storm clouds, were fixed on Hannah with an expression she couldn't name. Not pity, not disgust, something closer to anger. "Papa," the smallest girl whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "Why is that lady in there?" The man didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, boots scuffing dust, until he stood just a few feet from the cage. Hannah forced herself to sit up straighter, though her muscles screamed in protest. She wouldn't cower. Not in front of children, not in front of anyone. His eyes tracked over her face, the sunburn, the split lips, the hollow cheeks, and his jaw tightened. "How long?" he asked, and his voice was low, quiet, but it carried weight. Hannah's throat worked. She tried to speak, managed only a croak. 5 days, someone called from across the square. Sheriff Dolan emerged from the jailhouse, thumbs hooked in his belt, grinning like a man who'd just won a hand of poker. He was a thick-built man with a red face and the kind of swagger that came from wearing a badge in a town too small to question him. 5 days baking in the sun, Dolan continued, sauntering closer. Teaches beggars a real fine lesson about asking for handouts in my town. The tall man turned to face him, and something in the movement made Dolan's grin falter. Just a fraction, just enough. She asked for handouts? Vagrancy, begging, public nuisance. Dolan ticked them off on his fingers. We got standards here in Dust Creek. Can't have every drifter thinking they can just wander in and she asked for work, a voice said. Everyone turned. Old Mr. Henley, the barber, stood in the doorway of his shop, arms folded. He was a thin man with white hair and a reputation for speaking his mind, which in Dust Creek meant he mostly kept his mouth shut. But now he met Dolan's glare without flinching. I was there, Henley said. Heard her myself. She asked Mrs. Pritchard for work, didn't beg, didn't cause trouble, just asked if there was anything needed doing. Dolan's face darkened. You calling me a liar, Henley? I'm saying what I heard. The tall man looked at Hannah again, then back at Dolan, and when he spoke his voice was colder than winter stone. Open the cage. Dolan laughed. Actually laughed, head thrown back like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Oops. Open the... Who the hell are you? Samuel McCord. I'm asking you to open the cage. Well, Samuel McCord, I'm telling you to mind your own damn business and get back in your wagon before... Before what? The question hung in the air like smoke. Samuel McCord didn't raise his voice, didn't move. But something shifted in the space between them. Some invisible line drawn in dust and heat, and the weight of a man who'd had enough of watching cruelty dressed up as law. Dolan's hand drifted toward the gun on his hip. Before I decide you're disturbing the peace. Papa. The oldest girl stepped forward, maybe 16 with her mother's face and her father's eyes. She kept her voice steady, but Hannah could see her hands trembling. We should go. Samuel shook his head once. Short. Final. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather fold thick with bills. He peeled off several and held them out. How much? Dolan blinked. What? How much to open the lock? Name your price. For a moment, the sheriff just stared. Then his grin came back, uglier than before. You want to buy yourself a beggar? That it? What are you planning to do with her, McCord? You got 5 daughters already? Figure you need a woman to warm your bed at night? The girls gasped. The oldest pulled the younger ones closer, shielding them. Hannah felt her face burn with something beyond sunburn. Shame, rage, helplessness all tangled together. Samuel moved so fast, Dolan didn't have time to react. 1 second he was standing 3 feet away. The next he had the sheriff pinned against the jailhouse wall, forearm pressed across his throat, close enough that when he spoke, every word was a promise. You ever talk about a woman like that again in front of my daughters, Samuel said, and I'll make sure you remember what respect feels like. You understand me? Dolan's face went purple. He clawed at Samuel's arm, boots scrabbling in the dust. You're assaulting an officer. I'm offering you cash for a key. Business transaction. Samuel pressed harder. Unless you'd rather explain to the judge why you're holding a woman in a cage for asking for work. 50, Dolan wheezed. $50. Samuel released him, and Dolan doubled over, gasping. The square had gone silent. Even the usual morning sounds, horses, hammers, the creak of shop signs seemed to have stopped. Everyone was watching now. Samuel counted out the money, crisp bills that probably represented a month's work, and held them up. Open it. Dolan snatched the cash, shoved it in his pocket, and pulled a key ring from his belt. His hands shook, from anger or fear Hannah couldn't tell, as he jammed the key into the padlock. The lock snapped open with a sound like breaking bone. There, Dolan spat. She's yours. You bought her. That makes her your problem now. Samuel ignored him. He pulled the cage door wide and crouched down, meeting Hannah's eyes at her level. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the scar along his jawline. His face was kind, tired, real. Can you stand? he asked. Hannah tried. She braced her hands on the bars, pushed herself up, felt her legs tremble and buckle. The world spun. She would have collapsed face first into the dirt if Samuel hadn't caught her, arms steady and sure, lifting her like she weighed nothing at all. "I've got you," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Safe. The word was so foreign, Hannah almost didn't recognize it. She wanted to thank him, wanted to explain, wanted to tell him she wasn't what Dolan said, wasn't a beggar or a criminal or something to be ashamed of. But her throat wouldn't work and her vision was blurring and all she could do was hold on as he carried her toward the wagon. The girls parted like a sea, eyes wide, and the smallest one, Ruthie, reached out to touch Hannah's hand with fingers soft as bird wings. "You're really hot," Ruthie whispered, "like a fever." "She needs water," the oldest girl said. She was already digging through a satchel, pulling out a canteen. "Papa, stop. Let me—" Samuel set Hannah down in the wagon bed as gently as if she were made of glass. The oldest girl, what was her name, tipped the canteen to Hannah's lips, and the first swallow of cool water was so shocking, so impossibly good, that Hannah choked on it. She coughed, gasped, tried again. This time it went down smooth, and she felt it all the way to her bones. "Slow," the girl murmured. "Small sips. You'll make yourself sick." Hannah nodded, drank again. The world was still spinning, but slower now. She could feel the shade of the wagon cover overhead, feel the breeze that snuck in under the canvas, feel the way the youngest girl had climbed up beside her and was staring with huge brown eyes full of wonder and worry. "What's your name?" Ruthie asked. "Hannah." It came out as a rasp, barely a whisper. "Hannah Brennan." "I'm Ruth Elizabeth McCord, but everyone calls me Ruthie." She pointed to the others in turn. "That's Mary, she's 16. That's Esther, she's 13. That's Abigail, she's 10. And that's little Sarah, but she's not that little anymore because she's 8 now." Hannah tried to smile. It hurt. "That's a lot of sisters." "Mama died when Sarah was born," Ruthie said matter-of-factly, the way children do when grief is just a fact they've lived with long enough to make it ordinary. "So it's just us and Papa now. He takes real good care of us, though. You'll see." "You'll see." As if Hannah was coming home with them. As if this wasn't temporary, wasn't charity, wasn't something that would end the moment Samuel McCord realized what he'd actually bought. Samuel climbed into the driver's seat, glanced back, met Hannah's eyes. "We've got about 2 hours to the ranch. There's blankets if you're cold, more water in the back. Mary'll look after you." "I'm not cold," Hannah whispered. Even in the shade, even with water in her belly, the heat was still everywhere. Samuel's mouth tightened. He knew. He'd seen the sunburn, the blisters, the way her skin had gone red and angry from days of exposure. He picked up the reins, clicked his tongue, and the wagon lurched forward. As they rolled out of Dust Creek, Hannah looked back one time. Sheriff Dolan stood in the square, watching them leave, and even from a distance she could see the look on his face. Not defeat, not shame. Calculation. She closed her eyes and let the motion of the wagon rock her into something that wasn't quite sleep, but wasn't quite waking either. Mary draped a damp cloth over her forehead, and Ruthie held her hand, and somewhere far away she could hear the girls talking in low voices. Gentle, careful, like they were afraid she might break if they spoke too loud. Maybe she would. Maybe she was already broken. Maybe that's what happened when you spent 5 days in a cage learning that the world didn't care whether you lived or died. But Samuel McCord had cared. He'd looked at her, really looked, not past or through, but at, and he'd seen a person worth saving. That was more than anyone else in Dust Creek had done. That was something. Hannah held on to it like a lifeline as the wagon carried her away from the cage, away from the heat and the cruelty and the terrible certainty that she'd die there, forgotten and alone. She held on to it and let herself hope, just for a moment, that maybe safe wasn't such a foreign word after all. Maybe it was something she could learn again. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a promise. It wasn't grand. No painted fences, no sprawling barns, no manicured gardens. Just a sturdy timber house with a wide porch, a barn that had seen better years but still stood proud, a chicken coop, a well with a rope bucket, and fields that stretched toward the mountains in neat rows of green and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and lazy in the afternoon heat, and Hannah could smell it even from the road, wood smoke and something else, something that made her stomach clench with hunger. Stew, maybe. Or bread. When was the last time she'd eaten bread? The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Samuel set the brake, climbed down, came around to the back. Hannah tried to sit up, tried to show him she wasn't completely helpless, but her body had other ideas. Everything hurt. Everything. Easy, Samuel said, and he lifted her again, this time carrying her up the porch steps and through the front door into a room that smelled like home. If home was a thing she'd ever really known. The house was simple but clean. Wooden floors worn smooth by years of footsteps. A stone fireplace with a kettle hanging over low flames. A long table surrounded by mismatched chairs. Quilts folded over the back of a rocking chair. Windows open to let the breeze through, curtains fluttering like pale ghosts. It was the kind of place that held a family, Hannah thought. The kind of place where people belonged to each other. Samuel set her down in the rocking chair, and Mary was already there with more water, with a wet cloth, with gentle hands that dabbed at Hannah's face and neck, while the younger girls hovered nearby, anxious and uncertain. "Esther, get the salve from the shelf," Mary said, all efficiency and purpose. "Abigail, pump fresh water. Make sure it's cold. Sarah, Ruthie, go gather eggs and check the garden. We need to make something soft for supper." The girls scattered like startled birds, and Hannah felt a surge of gratitude for Mary's quick thinking. It gave them something to do, something other than stare at the broken woman their father had brought home. Samuel crouched beside the chair, studying Hannah's face with that same focused intensity he'd shown in Dust Creek. "You hurting anywhere besides the obvious?" Hannah wanted to laugh. It would have come out bitter. "Everywhere's the obvious. I mean, inside. Ribs, stomach, Dolan kick you?" She shook her head. "Just the sun, and the bars, and not eating." Samuel's jaw worked. "How long since you ate?" 6 days, maybe 7. He stood, crossed to the fireplace, ladled something from the kettle into a wooden bowl. When he brought it back, Hannah saw it was stew, thick with vegetables and bits of meat, steam rising in fragrant curls. Her mouth watered so fast it hurt. "Small bites," Samuel said, handing her a spoon. "Your stomach's not used to it." Hannah tried. She did. But the first taste of real food after a week of nothing was so overwhelming she nearly sobbed. She forced herself to go slow, to chew, to swallow, to breathe between bites, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour it all at once. Samuel watched her for a moment, then seemed satisfied she wasn't going to make herself sick. He moved to the window, looked out at the fields where his daughters were working, and when he spoke, his voice was distant. "You got people, Hannah Brennan? Family somewhere we should send word to?" Hannah shook her head, spoon halfway to her mouth. "No, no one." "How'd you end up in Dust Creek?" This was the part she'd been dreading, the questions, the judgment, the moment when Samuel McCord realized he'd wasted $50 and a confrontation with the law on someone who didn't deserve saving. But she owed him honesty, at least that. "I was running," she said quietly, "from Denver, from a man named Silas Crenshaw." Samuel turned, and something in his expression sharpened. "Crenshaw? The railroad man?" "He calls himself a businessman, owns half of Denver, hotels, saloons, boarding houses, and contracts." Hannah set the bowl down, her hands shaking. "Indenture contracts. Girls who owe money they can't pay back. Girls who sign papers they can't read. He buys the contracts, puts the girls to work, and if they try to leave..." She touched her wrist, where a faint scar circled like a bracelet. "He makes sure they don't get far." Samuel's face had gone stone still. "You were indentured." "For 3 years. I was 2 years in when I found out Crenshaw was selling some of us. Not as workers, as..." She couldn't say it, couldn't put words to the thing that had made her run in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and terror in her throat. She didn't have to. Samuel understood. She could see it in the way his hands curled into fists, the way his shoulders went rigid. "That's why you were in Dust Creek," he said. "Hiding. Trying to. I thought if I got far enough from Denver, if I found work in a small town, maybe he wouldn't bother tracking me down. But I didn't have papers, didn't have references. No one would hire me." Hannah laughed, hollow and sharp. So I got locked in a cage for asking. Seems about right. It's not right. None of it's right. No, Hannah agreed, but it's how things are. Samuel crossed back to her, crouched down again so they were eye level. His gaze was steady, unflinching. Crenshaw know where you are? I don't think so. I've been careful. Stayed off main roads, didn't use my real name until Dolan arrested her and wrote it down in his log. Until it became part of the public record, there for anyone who came looking. Hannah's chest tightened. He could find me now if he's looking. Then we'll deal with it if he does. Mr. McCord? Samuel. Samuel. She tested the name, found it fit. You don't owe me anything. You already saved my life. If Crenshaw comes, if there's trouble, I can leave. You can stay, Samuel said. And it wasn't a suggestion or charity or pity. It was a simple statement of fact. You can stay. You can rest. You can heal. And if Crenshaw or anyone else comes looking for you, they'll have to go through me first. Hannah stared at him. Tried to find the angle, the catch, the hidden price. Men like Samuel McCord didn't exist in her world. Men protected what belonged to them. And they took what they wanted. And kindness was just another word for leverage. But his eyes were clear. His hands were steady. And when Ruthie came running through the door with a basket of eggs and threw herself at her father's side, chattering about how many the hens had laid, Samuel's whole face transformed into something soft and unguarded. He loved his daughters. That much was obvious. And maybe, just maybe, that meant he understood what it felt like to protect something precious from a world that didn't care. Okay, Hannah whispered. I'll stay. For a little while. Samuel nodded, squeezed her shoulder once, brief, reassuring, then stood to help Ruthie with the eggs. Mary came back with the salve and began gently applying it to Hannah's burns, and Esther brought fresh water, and Abigail appeared with a quilt that smelled like lavender, and Sarah stood in the corner watching everything with solemn eyes that looked far too old for 8. They moved around her like a well-practiced dance, these 5 motherless girls who'd learned to make a home out of hard work and each other. And for the first time in longer than Hannah could remember, she felt something unclench in her chest. Not safety. Not yet. That would take time, take proof, take more than one afternoon of kindness. But the beginning of it. The possibility. The faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. The sun was setting when Samuel came back inside and Hannah had been moved to a small room off the kitchen. Mary's room, she'd learned, though Mary insisted on sleeping with her sisters so Hannah could have privacy. The room was plain but comfortable, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, a window that looked out over the fields turning gold in the fading light. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, every muscle in her body screaming, and tried not to think about how long it had been since she'd slept in an actual bed. Samuel knocked on the doorframe, hat in his hands. Wanted to check on you before we settle in for the night. You need anything? I'm fine, Hannah said automatically, then caught herself. Actually, I need to thank you. For everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay— You don't. Samuel's voice was firm. You don't owe me anything, Hannah. What I did today, that wasn't charity. That was human decency. Something this territory seems to have forgotten. Hannah studied him, this stranger who'd upended his whole day to drag her out of hell. Why? She asked. Why did you stop? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. My wife, Catherine. She died 8 years ago. Childbirth. Sarah lived, but Catherine— He cleared his throat. Before she passed, she made me promise something. She said, don't let the girls grow up thinking the world is just hard. Show them it can be kind too. Show them what it means to help when no one's watching. He met Hannah's eyes, and she saw the weight he carried, the promise he'd kept every day for 8 years. Today my daughters watched me walk past a woman in a cage, or they watched me do something about it. I couldn't let them learn the first lesson. Not and still call myself their father. Hannah felt her throat close up. Your wife sounds like she was a good woman. The best. Samuel's smile was sad and fond all at once. You'd have liked her. She never could stand seeing anyone hurting. He turned to go, then paused in the doorway. Get some sleep, Hannah. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out what comes next. He was gone before she could respond, his footsteps fading down the hall. Hannah lay back on the bed, felt the give of an actual mattress beneath her, felt the cool cotton of the pillowcase against her burned cheek. Through the thin walls, she could hear the girls getting ready for bed, water splashing, quiet laughter, Mary's voice reminding someone to brush their teeth. Normal sounds, family sounds. The kind of sounds Hannah hadn't heard since she was a child herself, before her parents died and left her alone in a world that ate orphans alive. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, down into darkness that for once didn't feel like drowning. But even as sleep claimed her, some part of Hannah stayed alert, listening, waiting, because she knew, had learned through bitter experience, that kindness was temporary, that safety was an illusion, and that sooner or later the past always found you. Silas Crenshaw owned her contract. That meant he owned her, and men like Crenshaw didn't let their property walk away. She'd found shelter for tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe even a week if she was lucky. But she couldn't stay forever. And when the time came to run again, she'd make sure Samuel and his daughters were far away from whatever came looking for her. It was the least she could do for the man who'd given her back her humanity, even if it was just for a little while. Outside, the summer stars wheeled across the Colorado sky, indifferent and eternal. Inside, Hannah Brennan slept in a real bed for the first time in 3 years and dreamed of cages that opened and men who kept their promises and the dangerous, impossible thought that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. Morning came too early, slipping through the window in pale gold light that made Hannah's eyes burn. For a moment, just one breath, one heartbeat. She didn't know where she was. Then memory rushed back. The cage, the sun, Samuel McCord's steady hands lifting her to safety. She was in Mary's room, in the McCord house. She was safe. For now. Her body disagreed with that assessment. Every muscle ached, her skin felt too tight across her bones, and when she tried to sit up, the room tilted sideways. She gripped the edge of the mattress and waited for the world to settle, breathing through her teeth. A soft knock at the door. "Miss Hannah?" Mary's voice, tentative and careful. "Papa said to let you sleep, but it's nearly 8 and I thought you might be hungry." Hannah's stomach answered before she could, growling so loud she heard Mary's quiet laugh through the door. "I'll take that as a yes. I'll bring you something. Don't try to get up yet. You're still healing." The girl's footsteps faded and Hannah sagged back against the pillow. 8 o'clock. When was the last time she'd slept past dawn? In Crenshaw's boarding house, the girls were up at 5 to start washing linens. Before that, when she'd still had parents and a life that made sense, her mother would wake her with tea and sunlight and the promise of fresh bread. Before. Such a small word for everything she'd lost. Mary returned with a tray balanced carefully in both hands. She'd brought oatmeal thick with cream and honey, 2 biscuits wrapped in a cloth napkin, and a cup of water so cold it must have come straight from the well. The girl set it on the washstand and helped Hannah sit up against the headboard, propping pillows behind her with the same gentle efficiency she'd shown yesterday. "You don't have to wait on me," Hannah said, though her hands were already reaching for the oatmeal. "I can. Papa said you're to rest today. Doctor's orders." "Your father's a doctor?" Mary smiled. "No, but he's raised 5 daughters and buried a wife. He knows sick when he sees it." Her smile faded. "You look better than yesterday, though. Less like you're about to fall over dead." Hannah took a bite of oatmeal and nearly moaned. Sweet, rich, perfect. "You're cooking?" "Esther's, actually. She's got the best hand with breakfast." Mary perched on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. She had her father's gray eyes and the same direct way of looking at people, like she could see past whatever walls they'd built. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "How bad was it? Really?" The question was so blunt, so unexpected that Hannah didn't have time to build a lie. "Bad enough that dying started to seem like mercy." Mary absorbed that without flinching, 16 years old and already too familiar with hard truths. "Papa told us a little about Crenshaw, about the contracts." She picked at a loose thread on the quilt. "Is he going to come looking for you?" "I don't know, maybe." Hannah set the bowl down. "Mary, I need you to understand something. I'm grateful to your father, more than I can say. But if Crenshaw finds me, if there's trouble, I'll leave. I won't let anything happen to you or your sisters." "Papa won't let you leave?" "It's not his choice." "Actually," Mary said quietly, "I think it is. When Papa decides something, it tends to happen. He decided to leave Boston after Mama died because he needed space to grieve. He decided to raise us himself when everyone said he should remarry or send us to relatives. And yesterday he decided you were worth saving." She met Hannah's eyes. "So whether you like it or not, Miss Hannah, you're part of this family now, at least until you're strong enough to make your own choices." Hannah didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent 3 years learning that families were things other people had, that belonging was a luxury for those who could afford it. But here was this girl, this stranger, claiming her like it was the simplest thing in the world. "You don't even know me," Hannah whispered. "We know you didn't deserve what happened to you. That's enough for now." Mary stood, smoothed her skirt. "Finish your breakfast. Esther's going to bring wash water in a bit, and I found one of Mama's old dresses that might fit you. Your clothes are—" She trailed off, diplomatic. "Ruined," Hannah finished. "You can say it." "Ruined," Mary agreed. "But that's fixable. Most things are, given time." She left Hannah alone with her thoughts and the oatmeal, which suddenly tasted like ash. Most things are fixable. Maybe that was true in Mary's world, where fathers kept promises and sisters looked after each other and home was a place you could count on. But Hannah knew better. Some things stayed broken. Some stains never washed out. Still, when Esther knocked half an hour later with a basin of warm water and a bar of lavender soap, Hannah let herself pretend. Let herself imagine that maybe a hot bath and clean clothes could wash away more than just dirt and sweat. Let herself hope, just for a moment, that Mary might be right. The dress fit reasonably well, a simple blue cotton with tiny white flowers that had probably been lovely before years of wear had faded the color. It was loose in the bodice and short in the hem, but it was clean and whole, and it didn't smell like fear. Hannah braided her hair the way her mother had taught her, pinned it up, and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. A stranger looked back. Thinner than she remembered, older than her 24 years, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of things no amount of sleep would fix. But alive. Still breathing. Still here. It would have to be enough. She found the family in the main room. Samuel sat at the table with account books spread before him, reading glasses perched on his nose, while the younger girls sprawled on the floor playing some complicated game that involved marbles and much giggling. Mary stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled like heaven, and Esther was setting out plates for the midday meal. Samuel looked up when Hannah entered, and something in his expression gentled. "You look better. How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by horses and left in the sun to dry." Hannah managed to smile. "But better than yesterday." Low bar to clear. He pushed the account books aside. "Sit. We're about to eat." Hannah hesitated. "I could help. I'm not useless." "Didn't say you were. But you're also not fully healed, and the last thing we need is you passing out into the stew." Samuel's voice was firm but kind. "Sit, Hannah. There'll be plenty of work once you're stronger." So she sat and watched as the family moved around each other with the easy rhythm of long practice. Mary dished out stew while Esther poured water, and the younger girls scrambled to their seats. Ruthie, climbed into the chair beside Hannah and beamed up at her. "You smell like flowers now," the little girl announced. "I like it better than cage smell." "Ruthie," Samuel's voice held warning. "What? She did smell bad yesterday, but not her fault," Ruthie added quickly, looking at Hannah with earnest brown eyes. "Papa said it's not polite to mention how people smell, but I think it's okay if you say they smell better now, right?" Despite everything, Hannah laughed. It hurt her chest and her throat, and probably her dignity, but it felt good, real. "It's okay, Ruthie. I did smell bad. Thank you for noticing I smell better." Ruthie glowed with vindication, and Sarah, quiet, watchful Sarah, giggled into her hand. The meal was simple but good, thick stew with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread that Abigail had apparently made that morning, and cold buttermilk that tasted like summer. Hannah ate slowly, mindful of Mary's earlier warning about making herself sick, and watched the family interact. Samuel asked about chores, who'd fed the chickens, who'd check the irrigation channels, whether the fence in the north pasture still needed mending. The girls reported in turn, overlapping each other with details and complaints, and the occasional argument about who'd done more work. It was chaotic and loud and achingly normal. Hannah had forgotten what normal felt like. "Miss Hannah," Abigail said suddenly, "do you know how to sew?" Hannah blinked. "Some." "Why?" "Because Mary's been mending Papa's shirts for 3 years and she's terrible at it." Abigail ignored her older sister's indignant sputter. "Last time she sewed a button, it fell off in the wash." "It was a weak button," Mary protested. "It was a perfect button until you stabbed it to death with a needle." Samuel hid a smile behind his cup. "Girls." "I could help with mending," Hannah offered. "If you need it. My mother was a seamstress. She taught me when I was young." "Really?" Mary looked genuinely relieved. "Because I have about 15 shirts that need buttons and 3 dresses with torn hems, and I'd rather shoe a horse than sew." "I'll trade you," Esther said. "I'll sew if you muck the stalls." "Done." Samuel shook his head, but his eyes were warm. "Seems you've found your place already, Hannah. This household runs on negotiation and bribery, and sometimes threats," Ruthie added helpfully. "Like when Sarah won't share the good pencils." "I need them for my drawings," Sarah said, defensive. "You need all 12 of them at once?" The argument spiraled from there, good-natured and familiar, and Hannah felt something ease in her chest. This wasn't perfect. It was messy and loud and full of the kind of small conflicts that came from people living together day after day. But it was real. It was honest. And nobody was getting locked in a cage for speaking their mind. After the meal, Mary dragged Hannah to a chair by the window and presented her with a basket overflowing with mending. Shirts, aprons, stockings with holes, a dress that had lost half its hem. Hannah picked up the first shirt, one of Samuel's by the size, and examined the missing button. "Mary wasn't wrong about stabbing it to death," she murmured. Mary, washing dishes at the basin, laughed. "See, I told you I was bad at it." Hannah threaded a needle and got to work. Her fingers remembered the rhythm even after years away from it. Loop and pull, securing the button so it would hold. It was meditative, mindless in the best way. She could let her mind drift while her hands stayed busy. Samuel came to stand beside her after a while, watching her work. "You're good at that. My mother used to take in sewing to help pay rent. I learned young." Hannah tied off the thread and reached for the next shirt. "It's one of the few useful things I know how to do." "I doubt that's true." "You'd be surprised. I can sew a straight seam and boil water without burning it. Beyond that, I'm fairly useless." Samuel pulled up a chair and sat, turning it backward so he could lean on the backrest. "You survived 3 years of indenture and a week on the run with Crenshaw hunting you. I'd say you're tougher than you give yourself credit for." Hannah's hands stilled. "That's not toughness. That's just refusing to die out of spite." "Sometimes they're the same thing." He was quiet for a moment, watching his daughters, Esther teaching Ruthie how to braid, Abigail reading to Sarah on the porch, Mary humming as she worked. Catherine used to say that survival was its own kind of courage, that just getting up every morning when the world's trying to break you, that matters. "Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. Too wise for me, honestly. I never understood what she saw in a stubborn rancher who could barely string 2 words together." Samuel smiled, distant with memory. "But she chose me anyway, gave me 8 good years and 5 incredible daughters before—" His voice caught. "Before she left." Hannah set down the mending and looked at him properly. Really looked. She saw the grief worn smooth by time but still present, saw the loneliness underneath the competence, saw a man who'd been doing everything right for 8 years but still felt like he was failing somehow. "You're a good father," she said quietly. "Those girls worship you. They deserve better than me fumbling through it alone. They deserve exactly what you're giving them. A father who shows up, who fights for them, who teaches them the world can be kind." Hannah's throat tightened. "My father died when I was 12. I would have given anything for 8 more years with him. Your daughters know how lucky they are." Samuel met her eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the shared weight of loss. Then Ruthie came barreling through the door with a scraped knee and tears streaming down her face, and the moment broke. Papa, I fell. Samuel was up in an instant, scooping her into his arms, murmuring comfort while he examined the scrape. Hannah watched him gentle his daughter's tears with practiced ease and felt her chest ache with something she couldn't name. This was what a family looked like, what love looked like. And she was standing on the outside looking in, same as always. The afternoon stretched long and lazy. Hannah finished the mending while the girls did their chores, and Samuel disappeared into the barn to work on something he wouldn't specify. By the time the sun started its descent toward the mountains, Hannah had repaired everything in the basket and started on a pile of stockings someone had left beside the chair. Mary called her to help with supper, and Hannah found herself peeling potatoes alongside Esther while the younger girls set the table. It was easy, companionable work. Nobody asked probing questions or treated her like she might break. They just folded her into the rhythm of the household as if she'd always been there. It was dangerous, Hannah thought. Dangerous to let herself relax. Dangerous to start believing this could last. But when Samuel came in smelling of hay and horses and smiled at her across the kitchen, when Ruthie grabbed her hand and pulled her to the table insisting she sit next to Papa, when Sarah shyly showed her a drawing of flowers and asked if Hannah liked it, well, maybe danger was worth it, just for a little while. They were halfway through supper when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the door, deliberate and commanding. The kind of knock that said official business, that said someone was used to being obeyed. Everyone froze. Samuel set down his fork slowly, eyes on the door. "Stay here," he said, voice low. He stood, crossed to the door, opened it just wide enough to see out. "Help you?" "Samuel McCord?" The voice was unfamiliar, sharp with authority. "I'm Deputy Marshal Thomas Blake. I need a word." Hannah's blood turned to ice. Marshal? They'd sent a marshal. Crenshaw had found her already, had sent the law to drag her back to Denver, and she'd brought this down on Samuel and his daughters after everything they'd done for her. "About what?" Samuel asked, voice carefully neutral. "About a woman. Hannah Brennan. I have information she's here." The room was so quiet Hannah could hear her own heartbeat. Mary's hand found hers under the table and squeezed tight. Esther had gone pale. Even Ruthie had stopped fidgeting. Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then, "She's here. What of it?" "I need to speak with her. It's a matter of legal business regarding an indenture contract." "Contract's not worth the paper it's written on if it was signed under duress." "That's not for you to determine, Mr. McCord. Now, I can do this easy or I can do it difficult, but either way I'm going to need to speak with Miss Brennan. Tonight." Hannah stood before she could think better of it. Her legs shook, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm Hannah Brennan." Samuel turned, started to protest, but Hannah shook her head. "It's fine. I knew this was coming." She walked to the door and Samuel stepped aside, though his expression made it clear he didn't like it. The deputy marshal was a lean man with hard eyes and a mouth like a knife slash. He looked Hannah over with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating property. "Miss Brennan, I'm here on behalf of Silas Crenshaw. You're wanted back in Denver to fulfill the terms of your contract." "I'm not going back." Blake's smile was thin and cold. "That's not your choice to make. You signed a legal document, under coercion. I was 17 and starving, and his men said sign or starve. That's not legal consent. Contract doesn't specify how consent was obtained. It's valid until a judge says otherwise." Blake pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have a warrant for your return to Denver. You can come peacefully or I can take you in chains, but either way, you're coming." "Like hell she is." Samuel moved to stand beside Hannah, and the protective fury in his voice made Blake's hand drift toward his gun. "Don't do anything stupid, McCord. I'm a federal officer executing a lawful warrant. You interfere, you'll hang. Your warrant's worth nothing if the contract's invalid." "Then she can argue that in court, in Denver, where she belongs." Hannah felt the trap closing. Blake was right, technically, legally right. Without a judge to void the contract, she was still Crenshaw's property. She could fight it, but she'd have to do it from a Denver jail cell, while Crenshaw's lawyers made sure the trial never happened. She'd run before. She could run again. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll go." "Hannah, no!" Samuel grabbed her arm. It's okay. She met his eyes and willed him to understand. I'll go to Denver. I'll face the judge. It'll be fine. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but what choice did she have? She wouldn't let Samuel hang for her sake. Wouldn't let his daughters lose their father because he'd been fool enough to help a stranger. Blake looked satisfied. Smart choice. We leave at dawn. Pack what you need. He left without another word, boots heavy on the porch steps, and Hannah heard a horse whinny from somewhere in the yard. He'd ride back to town tonight, probably, sleep at the boarding house and return in the morning to collect his prize. The door closed and the silence was suffocating. You're not going. Mary's voice shook. Papa, tell her she's not going. But Samuel wasn't looking at Mary. He was looking at Hannah with an expression she couldn't read, calculation, anger, something harder underneath. Come with me, he said quietly. Now. He led her outside to the porch, out of earshot of the girls, and when he turned to face her, his eyes were storm gray and furious. You think I'm letting you walk back into that? You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Samuel paced 3 steps, turned back. Blake said the contract's valid until a judge voids it. So we void it. Samuel Crenshaw owns half the judges in Denver. He doesn't own me. Samuel's voice was hard, decided. And he doesn't own you anymore either, because I do. Hannah stared. What? Crenshaw's contract is what, 3 years of indenture? I'll buy it from him, pay out the term, and release you. You can't afford that. I've got savings. I've got land I can mortgage. I'll find the money. Samuel, that's insane. You'd bankrupt yourself for a stranger. You're not a stranger. He grabbed her shoulders, gentle but firm, forcing her to meet his eyes. You've been here 2 days and my daughters already love you. Ruthie talks about you at breakfast. Sarah drew you flowers. Mary trusted you with her mother's dress. His voice cracked. And I'll be damned if I let some Denver vulture drag you back to hell because I didn't have the spine to fight for you. Hannah felt tears burning her eyes. Why? Why would you do this? Because Catherine would have. Because it's right. Because... He stopped, swallowed hard. Because you matter, Hannah. You matter and you deserve a chance at a real life. And if I can give you that, then I'm going to, whether you like it or not. The tears spilled over. Hannah tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming, 3 years of fear and exhaustion and desperate hope finally breaking through. I can't let you... Too late. I already decided. Samuel's smile was grim. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to Denver with Blake. I'm going to find Crenshaw, and I'm going to buy your freedom. And when I come back, you and I are going to figure out what comes next. What if he won't sell? Then I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. The steel in Samuel's voice left no room for argument. But one way or another, Hannah Brennan, you're done running. This ends in Denver. Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, reckless, that she wasn't worth this kind of sacrifice. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was nod and let Samuel pull her into a brief, fierce hug that felt like armor, and promise all at once. We'll fix this, he murmured against her hair. I swear to you, we'll fix this. And despite every lesson the world had taught her about trust and men and the cost of hope, Hannah let herself believe him. Just this once, just long enough to breathe. Samuel left before sunrise with Deputy Marshal Blake, the wagon wheels cutting through morning mist like a knife through cloth. Hannah watched from the porch until they disappeared over the ridge, her chest tight with the kind of dread that had no name. Mary stood beside her, silent and solid, and when the road was empty, she took Hannah's hand and squeezed once. He'll come back, the girl said quietly. Papa always comes back. Hannah wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that Samuel McCord was the kind of man who kept promises and won battles against men like Silas Crenshaw. But she'd learned a long time ago that wanting something didn't make it true. The day stretched long and hollow without him. The girls went about their chores with unusual quietness, and even Ruthie's chatter had a forced quality to it, like she was trying to fill the silence with noise before it swallowed them all. Hannah helped where she could, washing dishes, sweeping floors, mending the endless pile of clothes that seemed to regenerate overnight. It kept her hands busy, but her mind wandered to Denver, to the boarding house where she'd spent 2 years sleeping on a straw mattress with 12 other girls, to Crenshaw's office with its leather chairs and the smell of cigar smoke that still made her stomach turn. She wondered what Samuel would say when he met him, wondered if Crenshaw would laugh in his face or simply have him thrown out, wondered if— "Stop it," Mary said, appearing at her elbow with a basket of eggs. "I can hear you thinking from across the room." Hannah blinked. "What?" "You're doing that thing where you convince yourself everything's going to go wrong." Mary set the basket down and fixed Hannah with a look that was far too knowing for 16. "Papa's not going to fail. He's too stubborn for that." "Stubborn doesn't beat money and connections." "No, but stubborn beats giving up. And Papa doesn't give up." Mary started transferring eggs to a bowl, checking each one for cracks. "When Mama died, everyone said he should send us to relatives. Said a man couldn't raise 5 daughters alone. Papa looked them dead in the eye and said he'd rather die trying than live, knowing he'd given us away." She paused, holding an egg up to the light. "He didn't die, and we're still here." Hannah felt something catch in her throat. "You really believe he can do this?" "I believe he'll do everything in his power to make it happen. That's all any of us can do." Mary set the last egg down and turned to face Hannah fully. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If something goes wrong, if Papa can't buy the contract or if Crenshaw sends more men, you won't run. Not without telling us. Not without giving us a chance to help." Hannah started to shake her head, started to say that she couldn't possibly let them put themselves at risk. But Mary's hand shot out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me, Hannah. Because we've already lost one mother. I won't lose another person I care about just because they thought they were protecting us." Another person I care about. The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. She'd been here 3 days, and this girl with her mother's dress and her father's eyes already claimed Hannah as someone worth keeping. "I promise," Hannah whispered. "I won't run without telling you." Mary's expression softened. "Good, now help me make bread. Esther's hopeless at kneading, and if we leave it to her, we'll be eating bricks for supper." The day passed in flour dust and domestic rhythm. Hannah lost herself in the work. The push and fold of dough, the simple alchemy of turning basic ingredients into something warm and nourishing. Ruthie and Sarah came to watch, and somehow Hannah ended up teaching them how to braid dough for a fancy loaf, their small hands clumsy but eager. "Mama used to make bread like this," Sarah said softly, and it was the first time Hannah had heard her mention Catherine without being prompted. "For special occasions, birthdays and Christmas, and when Papa came home from long trips." "Then we'll make it for when your Papa comes home this time," Hannah said, guiding Sarah's fingers to tuck the end of the braid properly. "So he knows we were thinking of him." Sarah's smile was small but genuine, and when the bread came out of the oven hours later, golden and perfect and smelling like everything good in the world, all 5 girls crowded around to admire it like it was a work of art. "Papa's gonna love this," Ruthie announced, reaching for the crust before Mary slapped her hand away. "Papa's gonna love it if there's any left when he gets back, which means you don't eat it all before supper." They ate simple that night, stew and the special bread and early berries that Abigail had found growing wild near the creek. The girls talked and laughed and argued over who got the last piece of bread, and for a few hours Hannah could almost forget that Samuel was in Denver facing down a man who thought he owned her. Almost forget that tomorrow or the next day a wagon would roll up that road and everything would change. But night came eventually, as it always did, and with it came the silence that made forgetting impossible. Hannah lay in Mary's narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, counting knots in the wood until her eyes burned. Sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Crenshaw's face, saw the boarding house, saw the contracts stacked on his desk with names written in girls' desperate handwriting, saw the room where he took the ones he'd bought for purposes that had nothing to do with labor and everything to do with power. She'd been lucky. 2 years of washing linens and scrubbing floors and keeping her head down, and he'd never called her to that room. But she'd seen the girls who came back hollow-eyed and silent, and she'd known it was only a matter of time before her luck ran out. That's when she'd run. The night she'd overheard Crenshaw telling one of his foremen that Hannah was getting too old for laundry work, that he had other plans for her. She'd packed nothing, taken nothing, just walked out into the Denver night and kept walking until the city lights disappeared behind her. And now Samuel McCord was in that same city, in that same building, probably sitting across from Crenshaw, trying to negotiate with a man who didn't understand negotiation, only ownership. Hannah pressed her hands to her face and tried to breathe through the panic. A soft knock at the door. "Miss Hannah? You awake?" "Esther." Hannah sat up quickly, wiping her eyes even though the darkness hid her tears. "Come in." The door opened and Esther slipped inside, carrying a candle that turned her face into planes of light and shadow. She was 13 but carried herself older, with a seriousness that reminded Hannah of Mary. "Couldn't sleep either?" Hannah asked. Esther shook her head and sat on the edge of the bed, setting the candle on the washstand. "I keep thinking about Papa, about what he's doing right now. Probably sleeping in a boarding house somewhere, dreaming of home. Or arguing with that Crenshaw man. Papa's real good at arguing when he thinks he's right." Esther picked at the quilt. "He's right about this, isn't he? About buying your contract?" Hannah didn't know how to answer that. "Your father is a good man doing what he thinks is right. Whether it works or not, it has to work." Esther's voice was fierce, sudden. "It has to, because if it doesn't, then you'll leave and everything will go back to how it was before. Before wasn't bad. You have a good life here. Before was lonely." Esther met her eyes, and in the candlelight, Hannah saw a grief that ran deep and old. "It's been 8 years since Mama died, and we've been fine. But fine isn't the same as good. Fine is just surviving. But these last few days with you here, it feels different. It feels like maybe we could be good again." Hannah's throat closed. "Esther, I know you're scared. I know you think you'll bring trouble and you don't want us to get hurt. But we're already hurt, Miss Hannah. We've been hurting for 8 years. And having you here, talking to us, and teaching us, and making special bread. It's the first time in forever that this house feels like it did when Mama was alive." Esther's voice cracked. "So please, when Papa comes back, when he fixes this, please don't leave. Please stay." Hannah pulled the girl into a hug before she could think better of it, felt Esther's shoulders shake with silent sobs, felt her own tears soaking into the girl's hair. "I'll stay," she whispered. "If your father can make this work, if I'm truly free, I'll stay as long as you'll have me." Esther clung to her like a lifeline, and they sat there in the candlelight until the tears stopped and breathing came easier. When Esther finally pulled away, her eyes were red, but her expression was calmer. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not lying to me, for treating me like I'm old enough to understand." "You're old enough to understand more than people give you credit for." Esther managed a small smile. "That's what Mama used to say." She stood, picked up the candle. "Try to sleep, Miss Hannah. Papa will be back soon. I know it." She left as quietly as she'd come, and Hannah lay back down in the darkness. Sleep still felt impossible, but now the panic had edges worn smooth by something warmer. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of it. She closed her eyes and tried to believe that Samuel McCord was the kind of man who could stare down demons and win. 2 days passed like years. Hannah threw herself into work, scrubbing floors until her knees ached, washing clothes until her hands were raw, cooking meals that the girls picked at without enthusiasm. Everyone was waiting, listening for wagon wheels, watching the road like it might conjure Samuel through sheer force of will. On the 3rd day, Mary found Hannah in the garden pulling weeds with single-minded intensity, dirt under her nails and sweat soaking through her dress despite the morning cool. "He'll be back today," Mary said, kneeling beside her. "I can feel it." Hannah wanted to ask how she could possibly know that, but before she could speak, Ruthie came tearing around the corner of the house, pigtails flying, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Papa! Papa's coming! I see the wagon!" Hannah's heart stopped, then kicked into a rhythm so fast she felt dizzy. She stood, brushed dirt from her skirt with shaking hands, and followed Mary around to the front of the house where all 5 girls had gathered on the porch, shading their eyes against the sun. The wagon crested the ridge, and even from a distance, Hannah could see Samuel's familiar silhouette in the driver's seat. He was alone. No deputy marshal, no armed escort. That had to mean something. Good or bad, she couldn't tell yet. The wagon rolled into the yard and Samuel set the brake, climbed down moving like a man who'd aged a decade in 3 days. His face was drawn, his clothes rumpled, and when he looked at Hannah, his expression was unreadable. The girls swarmed him, talking over each other, asking questions he didn't answer. He hugged them each in turn, murmured something Hannah couldn't hear, then gently extracted himself and walked toward the porch where she stood frozen. "Did you—" Hannah's voice failed her. She tried again. "What happened?" Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age and covered in dense legal script. Hannah recognized it immediately, the contract she'd signed at 17, desperate and starving and too young to understand what she was agreeing to. "Crenshaw wouldn't sell," Samuel said quietly, and Hannah's world tilted. "But he did agree to a trade." "What kind of trade?" "Your contract for something he wanted more." Samuel held up the paper. "I bought a 50-acre property outside Denver last year. Good water rights, close to the railroad. Crenshaw's been trying to acquire it for months to expand his operations." His jaw tightened. "I signed it over to him. In exchange, he gave me this." Hannah stared at the contract in his hands. "You gave him 50 acres, and he released your indenture, completely. No conditions, no hidden clauses. You're free, Hannah. Legally, permanently free." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Hannah shook her head, reached for the contract with trembling hands. "Let me see." Samuel handed it over and she scanned the dense script, looking for the trap, the loophole, the place where Crenshaw would reach back in and snatch her freedom away. But there, at the bottom, in Crenshaw's distinctive slashing signature, and beside it the word void, stamped in red ink so dark it looked like blood. Contract fulfilled. Term satisfied. Bondholder released from all obligations. Hannah's legs went out from under her. She would have fallen if Samuel hadn't caught her, easing her down to sit on the porch steps while the world spun and reformed around a single impossible truth. She was free. "Hannah." Samuel crouched in front of her, hands on her shoulders, searching her face. "Breathe. You need to breathe." She sucked in air that felt like glass and fire all at once. "You shouldn't have. The land was The land was dirt and water. You're a person." Samuel's voice was hard, absolute. "There's no comparison, and I won't hear you say otherwise." "But your savings, your future. My future is 5 daughters who needed to see their father do the right thing, and a woman who deserves a chance at a life that's actually hers." He squeezed her shoulders gently. "The land's gone. I won't get it back. But I don't regret it for a second, so don't you dare feel guilty about it." Hannah looked at him, this man who'd given up a fortune for a stranger, who'd faced down Crenshaw in his own territory and walked away with exactly what he'd promised. Samuel McCord with his steady hands and storm-gray eyes, and the kind of stubborn honor that didn't exist in the world she'd known. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to... You don't have to say anything, just..." Samuel paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Just tell me you'll stay. The girls have been miserable without you, and I've gotten used to having help with the mending." His smile was tentative, almost shy. "Stay, Hannah. Make a life here. Not because you owe me anything, but because you want to." Hannah looked past him to where the 5 girls crowded in the doorway, trying to pretend they weren't listening to every word. Mary had tears streaming down her face. Esther was grinning so wide it had to hurt. Even Sarah had crept forward, clutching the drawing she'd made of flowers, waiting to see if the woman who'd taught her to braid bread would stay or disappear like her mother had. "I want to," Hannah said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I want to stay." The girls erupted in cheers. Ruthie launched herself off the porch and wrapped around Hannah like a determined barnacle. And then they were all there, crying and laughing and talking over each other in a tangle of arms and joy that felt too big for Hannah's chest to contain. Samuel stepped back, giving them space, but his smile was bright enough to rival the sun. That night, they had a celebration. The special braided bread made its appearance alongside roasted chicken and early vegetables in a pie that Abigail had secretly been saving for this exact occasion. The girls were loud and bright and insisted Hannah sit at the head of the table like she was someone important, someone who mattered, someone who belonged. And for the first time since her parents died, Hannah let herself believe it might be true. But good things, Hannah had learned, never lasted long without testing. The testing came at midnight in the form of hoofbeats and the smell of smoke. Hannah woke to the sound of glass breaking and Mary screaming. She bolted upright, disoriented, and saw orange light flickering through the bedroom window. Too bright, too wrong. Fire. She ran into the main room and found chaos. Samuel was already up, throwing water on flames that licked up the curtains. Mary had the younger girls huddled in the corner, counting heads, making sure everyone was accounted for. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. "Out!" Samuel shouted. "Everyone out! Now!" Hannah grabbed Sarah and Ruthie, pushed them toward the door. Mary had Esther and Abigail, and they stumbled onto the porch into a night that had turned nightmare. The barn was engulfed. Flames climbed the walls and poured from the hayloft, turning night into day with their terrible light. And in front of the inferno, mounted on horseback with 6 other men behind him, sat a figure Hannah would know anywhere: Emmett Crenshaw. Silas's younger brother, meaner and stupider and infinitely more dangerous because he didn't care about profit, only punishment. "Well now," Emmett called out, voice carrying across the yard. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little problem." Samuel stepped forward, and Hannah saw he had his rifle. When had he grabbed the rifle? "You've got no business here, Crenshaw. Turn around and ride out before someone gets hurt." Emmett laughed, and it was a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, someone's definitely getting hurt. See, my brother might be willing to let that little whore buy her freedom, but I'm not so forgiving." He gestured to the burning barn. "Consider this a message. You mess with Crenshaw property, you pay the price." Hannah's not property. Your brother released her." "My brother's a fool who thinks land is worth more than pride. Me, I understand that some lessons need to be taught permanent-like." Emmett's grin was wolf sharp. "You can keep the girl if you want, but you're going to watch everything you own burn first, starting with this pretty little house." One of his men raised a torch. "No!" Hannah stepped forward before Samuel could stop her. "This is between you and me. Leave them out of it." "Hannah, get back." "Too late for that, sweetheart." Emmett's eyes glittered in the firelight. "You ran, you hid, you cost my family money and reputation, but more than that, you made us look weak. And that's the one thing Crenshaws don't tolerate." He nodded to his men. 2 of them dismounted, torches in hand, advancing on the house. Samuel raised the rifle. "One more step and I start shooting." "You can't shoot all of us before we burn you out, McCord. Do the math." Hannah's mind raced. Emmett was right. Samuel was outnumbered and outgunned. Even if he hit 1 or 2 of them, the rest would torch the house with the girls still inside. They needed time, needed help, needed... The shot came from the darkness beyond the firelight, sharp and clean, and the torch fell from the first man's hand. He yelped, clutching his shoulder, and Emmett's horse reared. "What the... Next one's between your eyes, Crenshaw." A figure emerged from the shadows near the creek, tall, lean, wearing a badge that caught the light. Deputy Marshal Thomas Blake stepped into the circle of fire, with his gun drawn and an expression that promised violence. "Blake?" Emmett's voice cracked with confusion. "What are you doing here?" "Stopping you from doing something catastrophically stupid." Blake moved closer, gun steady. "Drop the torches. All of you. Now. This is family business. This is arson and attempted murder, and I've got 6 witnesses." Blake gestured to Samuel and his daughters. "You really want to add killing a federal officer to that list?" For a long moment, Emmett sat frozen. Then his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Blake. My brother owns half the lawmen in this territory. But not me, and not the judge I reported to before I rode out here." Blake's smile was cold. "See? I got to thinking after I took McCord to Denver. Got to wondering why Silas Crenshaw was so eager to get one girl back when he's got 50 others under contract. So I did some asking around, talked to some of those girls, heard some real interesting stories about what happens in Crenshaw's back rooms." Hannah's breath caught. Blake knew. He'd known all along. "Turns out," Blake continued, "there's about 15 different laws being broken in that boarding house. Human trafficking, forced servitude, statutory violations I won't name in front of children." He cocked his gun. "So here's what's going to happen. You and your boys are going to put those torches out. Then you're going to ride back to Denver and tell your brother that his whole operation is about to come down around his ears. Because I've got warrants being drawn up right now, and by the end of the week, Silas Crenshaw is going to be occupying a jail cell instead of an office. Emmett's face had gone the color of old cheese. You can't. I already did. Now drop the torches or I'll shoot you for resisting arrest. The men looked at Emmett. Emmett looked at Blake. The barn burned behind them, crackling and popping, sending sparks into the night sky like malevolent stars. Finally, Emmett threw his torch into the dirt and ground it out with his heel. His men followed suit, reluctant and sullen. This isn't over, Emmett snarled. Yeah, Blake said. It is. Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you ride away free. Emmett wheeled his horse and spurred it hard, and his men followed in a thunder of hooves and dust. They disappeared into the darkness, and the night settled back into something approaching quiet, broken only by the roar of flames consuming the barn. Samuel lowered his rifle, looked at Blake. You knew. When you came for Hannah, you already knew what Crenshaw was. Suspected, Blake corrected. Couldn't prove it until I talked to the girls. Took some time, some patience, but they talked eventually. Always do, when someone finally asks the right questions. He holstered his gun and looked at Hannah. I'm sorry I put you through that fear when I came for you. Had to make it look legitimate or Crenshaw would have gotten suspicious. Hannah could barely process his words. The warrants? They're real? Being drawn up as we speak. By this time next week, every girl in that boarding house will be free, and Crenshaw will be facing enough charges to hang twice over. Blake tipped his hat. You're safe now, Miss Brennan. Truly safe. Crenshaw can't touch you anymore. He turned to leave, and Samuel called after him. Thank you. For everything. Blake paused, looked back. Don't thank me. Thank your daughters. They're the ones who came to town looking for me, told me their father had gone to Denver to save someone, and please, mister, could I make sure he came home safe? His smile was genuine for the first time. They're good girls, McCord. You raised them right. Then he was gone, swallowed by darkness, leaving them alone with the burning barn and the impossible reality that everything had changed again. Mary started to cry, quiet tears of relief and exhaustion. Esther joined her, and then they were all crying, even Sarah, even Ruthie, who'd been so brave through everything. Samuel gathered them all close, and Hannah found herself pulled into the circle of his arms, surrounded by girls who'd claimed her as theirs, protected by a man who'd given up everything to set her free. The barn burned itself out by morning, leaving nothing but ash and charred timbers. But the house stood untouched, and the family was whole. And when the sun rose over the Colorado mountains, it found them together on the porch, exhausted, smoke-stained, but unbroken. Hannah Brennan was free. Not just legally, but truly free. Free from Crenshaw, free from fear, free to choose what came next. And as she watched the dawn light touch Samuel's face and listened to Ruthie chattering about breakfast plans and felt Mary's hand slip into hers, Hannah chose this. Chose them. Chose the possibility that maybe, after everything, she deserved something good. The smell of smoke lingered for days after the fire, clinging to clothes and hair and settling into the floorboards like an unwelcome ghost. Samuel and the neighboring ranchers salvaged what they could from the barn, tools mostly, a few pieces of tack that hadn't been completely destroyed, but the structure itself was beyond saving. By the end of the week, all that remained was a blackened skeleton of timber that Samuel tore down with grim efficiency, the girls helping haul away debris while Hannah watched from the porch and tried not to think about how close they'd come to losing everything. But they hadn't lost everything. The house still stood. The livestock had scattered during the fire, but most had been rounded up. The fields were untouched. And most importantly, the family was intact, shaken but whole, bound together by something stronger than shared blood. Hannah had stopped thinking of herself as temporary, somewhere between scrubbing soot from the kitchen floor and watching Samuel teach Ruthie how to hammer straight. She was part of this now, woven into the fabric of their daily lives so thoroughly that leaving felt impossible. Not because she owed them, though she did more than she could ever repay, but because she wanted to stay. Because when Mary brought her coffee in the morning without being asked, when Esther sought her opinion on which dress to wear, when Sarah showed her drawings and Abigail asked for help with reading, when Ruthie climbed into her lap and fell asleep during evening stories, Hannah felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. She felt like she belonged. Samuel felt it too. She could see it in the way he looked at her across the supper table, in the careful distance he maintained even as his eyes tracked her movements through the house, in the conversations that started about practical things, mending, gardening, whether they needed more flour from town, and drifted into something deeper. He'd ask about her childhood, her parents, the years before Crenshaw. She'd ask about Catherine, about Boston, about what made him choose this harsh, beautiful territory over the easier life he'd left behind. They were learning each other, Hannah realized. The way people do when they're building toward something that neither of them had quite named yet. 2 weeks after the fire, Ruth Hollister showed up. Hannah was hanging laundry when the wagon rolled into the yard. A sturdy vehicle pulled by 2 bay horses and driven by a woman who looked like she'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains. Ruth Hollister was somewhere north of 50 with steel gray hair pulled into a ruthless bun, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of presence that made you stand up straighter without quite knowing why. She climbed down from the wagon with the ease of someone half her age and surveyed the burned barn with the expression that might have been sympathy or might have been assessment. It was hard to tell with Ruth. "Heard you had some trouble," she said without preamble. Samuel emerged from the chicken coop, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Ruth, wasn't expecting you." "Clearly, or you'd have swept the porch." Ruth's tone was dry, but not unkind. She turned her sharp gaze on Hannah. "You must be the girl who caused all this fuss." Hannah felt herself bristle. "I didn't ask." "Didn't say you did. Said you caused it. There's a difference." Ruth crossed her arms. "Silas Crenshaw's in jail in Denver. His brother Emmett disappeared, probably ran to California before the law caught up with him. The boarding house got shut down, and 15 girls got released from contracts that should have been illegal in the first place." She paused. "That's your doing, whether you asked for it or not." Hannah stared. "They're free? All of them?" "Every last one. Federal marshals came through like an avenging army. Crenshaw's screaming about unlawful prosecution, but he'll hang or rot in prison. Either way, he's finished." Ruth's expression softened fractionally. "Thomas Blake made sure those girls got somewhere safe to land. Some went home to family, some found work in town. A few are staying at my boarding house until they figure out what's next." The relief was so sudden and overwhelming that Hannah had to sit down on the porch step. The girls she'd left behind, Maggie with the crooked smile, Anna who sang while she worked, little Violet who was only 14, they were safe. They were free. Because Samuel had bought Hannah's contract, because Blake had asked questions, because someone had finally cared enough to look at what Crenshaw was doing and call it by its real name. "I need to see them," Hannah said. "I need to know they're all right." "They are. But you could see for yourself if you came to town." Ruth looked at Samuel. "That's actually why I'm here. Prospect Valley's having a town meeting tomorrow night. New settlement about 20 miles northeast. Proper laws, elected officials, people trying to build something decent. They're looking for families willing to relocate, help establish the town." She paused meaningfully. "Thought you might be interested." Samuel frowned. "Why would I relocate? This ranch is my livelihood." "This ranch just lost its barn and nearly lost its house to a vindictive arsonist. You think that's the last trouble you'll see?" Ruth's voice was blunt. "Dust Creek's got a sheriff who locks women in cages and looks the other way when powerful men commit crimes. You want to raise 5 daughters in a place like that? What's Prospect Valley got that's different? A marshal who actually enforces the law. A judge who can't be bought. People who decided they were tired of watching corruption go unchecked." Ruth's gaze flicked to Hannah and back. "And distance from Denver. Geographic and otherwise." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said, "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long. Meeting's tomorrow at sundown. I'll save you seats." Ruth climbed back into her wagon with the same efficient grace she'd shown getting down. "And McCord? Bring the girl. People should meet her. She's got more courage than half the men in this territory." She left in a rattle of wheels and dust, and Hannah looked up at Samuel. "You don't have to go because of me. I won't be the reason you abandon your home. This isn't about abandoning anything. Samuel sat beside her on the step, his shoulder warm against hers. It's about choosing what's best for my daughters. And maybe Ruth's right. Maybe Dust Creek isn't it. But your ranch can be sold or leased. The land's not going anywhere. He turned to face her fully. Hannah, I built this place with Catherine. It's full of memories, good ones mostly, but it's also full of ghosts. Sometimes I think the girls and I have been living in a museum instead of a home. His hand found hers, calloused fingers threading through hers with careful intention. Maybe it's time to build something new, somewhere that doesn't have shadows in every corner. Hannah's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to go to that meeting. I want to hear what Prospect Valley has to offer. And I want you to come with me, not as hired help or a charity case, but as someone who has a say in what our future looks like. He squeezed her hand. Because that's what you are now, Hannah. Part of our future. If you want to be. The girls had gathered on the porch behind them at some point, pretending to be interested in anything except the conversation happening 2 feet away. Mary was grinning. Esther had her hands pressed to her mouth. Even Sarah was smiling, shy and hopeful. I want to be, Hannah whispered, more than anything. Samuel's answering smile was like sunrise. Then we'll go to Prospect Valley, all of us, and we'll figure out what comes next together. The town meeting was held in Prospect Valley's new church, a simple timber structure with straight walls and glass windows that caught the sunset like captured fire. The space was packed with families, farmers, merchants, people drawn by the promise of something better than what they'd left behind. Ruth had indeed saved them seats near the front, and Hannah found herself sandwiched between Mary and Samuel while the younger girls fidgeted in their Sunday dresses. The meeting was led by a man named Marcus Webb, late 40s, weathered face, the kind of voice that carried authority without needing to shout. He'd been a territorial judge in Wyoming before moving here, he explained, and he'd seen too many good towns rotted from the inside by corruption and greed. Prospect Valley is built on 3 principles, Webb said, standing at the makeshift pulpit. Fair law, honest work, and mutual protection. We don't tolerate bribes. We don't look the other way when powerful men abuse their position. And we stand together when trouble comes, because out here, trouble always comes eventually. He talked about land grants available for homesteaders, about the need for tradespeople and teachers, about plans for a proper school and a general store and eventually a rail connection. He talked about water rights and grazing agreements and how disputes would be settled by elected arbitration rather than whoever had the most guns. Hannah listened and felt something loosen in her chest. This was what she'd been searching for when she ran from Denver. Not just safety, but the possibility of a life built on something other than fear. A place where asking for work wouldn't get you locked in a cage, where contracts couldn't turn human beings into property, where the law meant something beyond whoever paid for it. After the formal presentation, people mingled and talked. Hannah met families who'd come from as far as Kansas and Missouri, all chasing the same dream of starting over. She met Elena Morales, a widow with 3 sons who planned to open a bakery. She met James and Nora Chen, who'd left California after racist legislation made it impossible for them to own property there. She met dozens of people whose names she'd forget by morning, but whose stories all had the same thread running through them. We were broken somewhere else, and we're hoping this place will let us heal. Ruth found her near the refreshment table where Hannah was trying to keep Ruthie from eating all the cookies. What do you think? Ruth asked, pouring herself coffee from a large pot. I think it sounds too good to be true. It's not perfect. Nowhere is. Ruth took a sip, made a face at the weakness of the coffee. But it's a chance, and sometimes that's all people need. Just one more, please? Ruthie was tugging at Hannah's sleeve, deploying her most devastating puppy dog eyes. You've had 3 already. Any more and you'll be sick. Hannah handed her an apple instead. Eat this and then we'll see. Ruthie pouted, but accepted the apple, wandering off to find her sisters. Ruth watched her go with something that might have been approval. You're good with them. The girls. Hannah felt herself flush. They make it easy. Nonsense. Children are never easy, but you care about them, and they can tell. That matters. Ruth set down her cup. Samuel asked me about employment opportunities in Prospect Valley for someone with sewing skills. Hannah's heart jumped. He did? There's a woman here, Mrs. Adelaide Finch, who runs a dressmaking shop. She's looking for help, someone who can do alterations and repairs. I mentioned you might be interested. Yes. Absolutely yes. Hannah couldn't keep the eagerness from her voice. Where do I find her? Ruth pointed across the room to where an elegant woman in her 60s was deep in conversation with Elena Morales. Adelaide's the one in the green dress. Go introduce yourself. Tell her Ruth sent you. Hannah crossed the room, feeling like she was walking toward her own future. Adelaide Finch had silver hair arranged in elaborate braids, kind eyes behind wire spectacles, and hands that moved expressively as she talked. When Hannah approached, she turned with a welcoming smile. Mrs. Finch? I'm Hannah Brennan. Ruth Hollister said you might need help with sewing. Adelaide's eyes sharpened with interest. Can you do buttonholes? Yes, ma'am. And hemming, alterations, basic tailoring. My mother taught me before she passed. Show me your hands. Hannah held them out, suddenly self-conscious of the calluses and rough skin from weeks of ranch work. But Adelaide took them gently, examined the fingers, tested the flexibility of the joints. Good hands, strong but nimble. Adelaide released her. I can offer you 3 days a week to start. Pays modest but fair, and if you prove skilled, there's potential for more hours. She paused. I should warn you, I have high standards. I won't sell shoddy work just because we're in a frontier town. If you can't meet my expectations, this won't work out. I understand. I'd like to try. Adelaide smiled, and it transformed her whole face. Then we'll see you Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Hannah felt like she was floating as she returned to where Samuel and the girls waited. Mary took one look at her expression and squealed. You got it! You got the job! I start Monday, 3 days a week. Hannah couldn't stop smiling even though her face hurt from it. I'm going to be a seamstress, a real seamstress, with wages and everything. Samuel's pride was visible even in the dim church lighting. Congratulations, you've earned it. We should celebrate, Esther declared. Can we get pie from that bakery lady? It's not open yet, Abigail pointed out with the patience of someone who'd explained this multiple times already. Then we'll bake our own pie when we get home. The special kind with the lattice top. Esther looked at Hannah hopefully. You'll show us how, right? Of course. We'll make the best celebration pie this territory has ever seen. The ride home was full of chatter and plans. The girls wanted to know everything about Prospect Valley. Could they really move there? Would they have their own house? Could they get a dog? Would there be other children to play with? Samuel answered patiently while Hannah held Ruthie, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder, sticky-faced and content. When they finally pulled into the ranch yard, the burned barn was a dark shape against the stars. But instead of feeling like a scar, it looked like possibility, cleared ground where something new could be built. Samuel helped Hannah down from the wagon while Mary herded the younger girls inside. For a moment they stood together in the darkness, close enough that Hannah could feel the warmth radiating from him. Thank you, she said softly, for taking me to the meeting, for asking Ruth about the job, for everything. You don't need to thank me for treating you like you matter. Samuel's voice was rough. Hannah, I need to tell you something. Her heart stuttered. What? I've been thinking about this for weeks now, trying to figure out the right way to say it, the right time. He took her hands in his, and even in the darkness she could see the intensity in his eyes. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling the moment I saw you in that cage. Maybe it was later, watching you teach my daughters to braid bread, or seeing you face down Emmett Crenshaw without flinching. I don't know exactly when it happened, but it did. And I need you to know that before we make any decisions about Prospect Valley. Hannah couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of his words settling into her chest like something precious and terrifying. Samuel, you don't have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know where I stand. He squeezed her hands gently. If you want to come to Prospect Valley as part of this family, I'd be honored. If you want to go on your own, start fresh without the complication of this, I'll understand. But either way, I needed to be honest with you. Hannah looked at him, this man who'd saved her, freed her, given her back her life without asking for anything in return. This man whose daughters had claimed her heart before she'd even realized she was giving it. This man who looked at her like she was something worth treasuring instead of something to be used. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. I've been trying not to because it seemed impossible, seemed like too much too fast. But I can't help it. You and your daughters, you've given me everything I thought I'd lost forever. A home, a family, a future worth having. She stepped closer, close enough to rest her forehead against his. I want to come to Prospect Valley. With you. With all of you. Not as hired help or a guest, but as what? Samuel's voice was barely audible. Hannah pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. As whatever you'll have me as. Partner, wife, second mother to your girls. I don't care what we call it. I just want to be yours. Samuel made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Then he was kissing her, gentle and desperate all at once, and Hannah felt like she was finally coming home after years of being lost. His hands cupped her face like she was something fragile, and she kissed him back with all the hope and fear and fierce joy she'd been carrying since the day he'd opened that cage door. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, "not because you owe me or because the girls need a mother, but because I can't imagine building a future that doesn't have you in it." "Yes," Hannah said, and started laughing because it was either that or cry, and she was so tired of crying. "Yes, Samuel McCord, I'll marry you." "Papa's kissing Miss Hannah!" They sprang apart to find all 5 girls crowded at the window, faces pressed to the glass, various expressions of delight and scandal on their faces. Ruthie was clapping. Mary was crying happy tears. Esther was grinning like she'd won a bet. Samuel groaned. "How long have you been watching?" "Long enough," Mary called back. "Does this mean Hannah's really staying? Forever?" "Forever," Hannah confirmed, and felt the truth of it settle deep. "If you'll have me." The girls erupted from the house in a tangle of nightgowns and squeals, surrounding them in hugs and questions, and demands to know when the wedding would be, and could they have new dresses, and could they call her mama, or was that too soon? Hannah looked at Samuel over the chaos of his daughters, their daughters now, and saw her whole future reflected in his eyes. It wouldn't be easy. Building a new life never was. But it would be theirs, built on honesty and hard work, and the kind of love that didn't come from grand gestures but from showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again. She'd been locked in a cage and left to die under a merciless sun. She'd been owned, hunted, burned out of the first safe place she'd found in years. But she'd survived. More than that, she'd found something worth surviving for. A family, a home. A man who looked at her like she hung the stars. And tomorrow they'd start making plans to move to Prospect Valley, to build a house with no ghosts, to create a future where 5 girls could grow up believing the world was kind, and a woman who'd been treated like property could finally be free. But tonight, under the Colorado stars with Samuel's arm around her waist and his daughters chattering about wedding plans, Hannah Brennan let herself believe in happy endings. Just this once. Just forever. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of packing and planning and the strange, bittersweet work of dismantling a life to build a new one. Samuel sold the ranch to a young couple from Kansas who'd been looking for land with good water access, and though Hannah saw the grief flash across his face when he signed the papers, his hand was steady. This wasn't abandonment, he'd told the girls over supper that night. This was choosing their future over their past. The girls took to the idea of Prospect Valley with the adaptability of youth. Mary was excited about the possibility of other families her age, about maybe attending the school they were planning to build. Esther wanted to know if there would be a library eventually. Abigail had already befriended Elena Morales' youngest son at the town meeting and was counting down the days until they'd be neighbors. Sarah had drawn pictures of what she imagined their new house would look like, always with 6 windows, 1 for each of them, plus Hannah. And Ruthie had simply declared that anywhere Papa and Hannah went was home, which had made Hannah cry into the dishwater when she thought no one was looking. But someone was always looking in a house full of girls. "You cry a lot for someone who's happy," Ruthie observed one afternoon, watching Hannah wipe her eyes while folding laundry. "Sometimes happiness is so big it leaks out," Hannah said, which made perfect sense to Ruthie and no sense at all to Abigail, who'd overheard and wanted a more scientific explanation. The wedding was planned for their first week in Prospect Valley. Ruth had offered her boarding house for the ceremony, and Adelaide Finch had quietly mentioned that she had her late daughter's wedding dress in storage if Hannah wanted to see it. The kindness of near strangers kept catching Hannah off guard, kept reminding her that the world contained more good than she'd let herself believe during those years of running and hiding. 3 days before they were set to leave for Prospect Valley, Deputy Marshal Thomas Blake rode up to the ranch with news that made Hannah's blood run cold. "Emmett Crenshaw's been spotted," Blake said without preamble, standing in the yard with his hat in his hands, near the Colorado-Wyoming border. "We think he's heading back this way." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Why would he come back? He has to know there's a warrant out for him." Men like Emmett don't think straight when their pride's been damaged. His brother's in prison, his family's reputation is destroyed, and in his mind, it's all because of one woman who refused to stay property. Blake looked at Hannah with something that might have been apology. "I'm not saying he's definitely coming here, but I wanted you to know. Wanted you to be careful." "We're leaving in 3 days," Samuel said. "We'll be in Prospect Valley before he could possibly find us." "That's good. That's smart." Blake shifted his weight. "But until then, keep your rifle loaded and your doors locked. And if you see anyone you don't recognize, you send one of the girls for me immediately." He left with promises to ride by daily until they departed, and Hannah tried not to let the fear settle back into her bones. She'd been free for weeks now, free and safe, and building towards something beautiful. Emmett Crenshaw was one man nursing a grudge, nothing more. He couldn't hurt her anymore. But that night she woke from dreams of burning barns and cages under summer sun, and had to remind herself 3 times that she was in Mary's bed in Samuel's house, and the door was locked and no one was coming for her. The knock came at dawn on their last full day at the ranch. Hannah was already awake, making coffee in the pre-sunrise darkness, while the girls slept, and Samuel did early chores in what remained of the livestock pen. The knock was soft, almost tentative, nothing like Emmett's aggressive pounding or Blake's official rap. She approached the door cautiously, keeping the heavy iron poker from the fireplace in one hand. "Who is it?" "Please, I need help. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Please." A woman's voice, young and frightened. Hannah hesitated for only a moment before cracking the door open, poker still raised. The girl on the porch couldn't have been more than 19. She was thin to the point of gaunt, dressed in a torn calico dress that had seen better months, with dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, and eyes that held the particular exhaustion Hannah recognized from her own reflection 3 years ago. Behind her, barely visible in the growing light, sat a horse that looked as worn out as its rider. "I'm sorry," the girl stammered, hands raised to show she was unarmed. "I didn't know where else to go. Ruth Hollister said, she said if I needed help to find Samuel McCord's ranch. Said there was a woman here who'd understand." Hannah lowered the poker. "Who are you?" "Violet. Violet Chen. I was in Crenshaw's boarding house. With you, I think, though you'd probably left before I arrived." She swayed slightly, and Hannah realized she was about to collapse. "Come inside," Hannah said, making the decision in an instant. She helped Violet across the threshold and into a chair by the fire, then called toward the bedrooms. "Mary, I need you." Mary appeared in her nightgown, took one look at Violet, and immediately went into the same efficient mode she'd shown when Hannah first arrived. Water, food, a blanket. Within minutes, they had Violet settled with bread and weak tea, and the girl's story emerged in fits and starts between bites. She'd been released when the boarding house was raided, had gone to stay with Ruth like the other girls. But 2 days ago, a man had come looking for her. Not Emmett, she didn't think, but someone working for him. Someone who'd gotten her name from somewhere and asked too many questions about where she'd gone and whether she knew anything about the Brennan woman who'd caused all this trouble. "I got scared," Violet whispered. "I thought if they found me, they'd use me to find you. So I ran, took Ruth's old mare without asking and just rode. I'm sorry. I know that was stealing. I'll pay her back somehow." "Ruth won't care about the horse," Hannah said gently. "She'll care that you're safe. Did anyone follow you?" "I don't think so. I stayed off the main roads, rode through the night." Violet's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what else to do. Everyone said you escaped Crenshaw, that you were free now. I thought maybe you'd know how to help me stay free too." Samuel had come in at some point during the story and stood leaning against the doorframe, listening. Now he crossed to the table and sat down across from Violet. "You did the right thing coming here," he said, "and you're safe now. We're leaving for Prospect Valley today instead of tomorrow, and you're coming with us." "I can't. I don't have any money, any way to pay." "Didn't ask you to pay. Asked you to come with us to a place where Emmett Crenshaw and his people can't touch you." Samuel's voice was firm. "We take care of our own, and anyone Ruth Hollister sends to us counts as our own. Understand?" Violet nodded, tears spilling over, and Hannah reached across the table to squeeze her hand. She understood exactly what the girl was feeling, the disbelief that kindness could be real, the fear that accepting help would somehow make everything worse, the desperate hope that maybe this time would be different. "We'll keep you safe," Hannah promised. "I swear it." The house erupted into controlled chaos as they accelerated their departure plans. The girls packed the last of their belongings while Samuel hitched the wagon and loaded their furniture. Hannah helped Violet wash and change into one of Mary's dresses, braided her hair, fed her a proper breakfast. By mid-morning, they were ready to leave. Everything they owned packed into 2 wagons, the livestock sold or distributed to neighbors, the ranch house empty and echoing. Samuel stood in the doorway one last time, looking at the space where he'd raised his daughters and buried his grief and learned to live again. Hannah came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You all right?" "Catherine and I built this place," he said quietly. "Planned every room, chose every timber. I can still see her here, standing at that stove, rocking Sarah by the fire, laughing at something Mary said." He squeezed Hannah's hand. "But she's not here anymore. She's been gone a long time, and I think she'd be happy that we're moving forward instead of staying frozen in what was. I think she'd be proud of you, of the girls, of what you've built from the grief." Samuel looked down at her, and his smile was soft with affection. "I think she'd like you. Catherine always loved people who refused to quit." They locked the door and left the key under the porch step for the new owners, then climbed into the wagon where the girls waited with varying degrees of patience. Violet sat squeezed between Esther and Abigail, looking overwhelmed but cautiously hopeful. Ruthie had already fallen asleep against Mary's shoulder despite the early hour. The journey to Prospect Valley took most of the day. They followed the route Samuel and Blake had taken to Denver but branched northeast before reaching the main road, taking a smaller track that wound through pine forests and across meadows brilliant with late summer wildflowers. The girls sang traveling songs to pass the time, and Violet slowly relaxed enough to join in, her voice tentative but sweet. They stopped once at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mary had packed. Sarah presented Violet with a drawing, a house with 6 windows and 7 stick figures holding hands in front of it. Violet stared at it for a long moment, then carefully folded it and tucked it into her pocket like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she whispered. No one's ever drawn me into their family before." "You're one of us now," Sarah said with the absolute certainty of 8-year-old logic. Hannah said so, and Hannah doesn't lie. By late afternoon, the valley came into view, a broad stretch of grassland nestled between rolling hills, a creek running silver through the center, and the beginnings of a town taking shape along the water. Hannah counted maybe 30 buildings in various states of completion, from finished houses with glass windows to timber frames still waiting for walls. The church where they'd held the town meeting stood at the heart of it all, white-painted and solid, its bell tower visible from miles away. People emerged as they rolled into town, waving, calling greetings, directing them toward plots of land that had been set aside for new families. Marcus Webb himself came to meet them, explaining that they'd reserved a half-acre lot near the creek with space for a house and a small barn. "The plot next to theirs belonged to Adelaide Finch," he added with a knowing smile in Hannah's direction, which would make her morning commute remarkably convenient. Ruth appeared with her usual impeccable timing, surveying their wagons and the exhausted travelers with the practiced eye of someone who'd organized more arrivals than she could count. "Made it in one piece, I see. And picked up a stray." Her gaze landed on Violet, and something that might have been relief flickered across her face. "Violet Chen, I've been worried sick about you, girl. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hollister. I didn't mean to steal your horse, The horse is fine. I'm more concerned about you. Ruth stepped closer, lowered her voice. The man who came asking questions, I didn't tell him anything, but he was persistent. You were right to run. He won't find her here, Samuel said. And if he does, he'll have to go through all of us. Ruth nodded approval. Good. Violet can stay with me until she's ready to find her own place. I've got 3 other girls from the boarding house already there. They'll be glad to see a familiar face. She looked at Hannah. You're staying with me too until the wedding, I assume, tradition and all that? Hannah had forgotten about that particular tradition, the bride spending the night before the wedding apart from her groom. I suppose I should. You suppose correctly. Samuel McCord, you get 1 more night with your daughters as a bachelor. Make it count. Ruth's tone was dry, but affectionate. Wedding's at noon tomorrow in the church. Adelaide's bringing the dress by my place tonight. The whole town's invited, so expect a crowd. The whole town. Hannah felt a flutter of nerves. She'd imagined something small and quiet, just Samuel and the girls and maybe Ruth, not a spectacle. Samuel must have seen something in her expression because he squeezed her hand. We can make it smaller if you want. Just us. No. Hannah took a breath, straightened her spine. No, if we're building a life here, if we're becoming part of this community, then we do it right. We let people celebrate with us. That's my girl, Ruth said approvingly. Now let's get you settled before the sun goes down. The evening passed in a flurry of activity. Samuel and several of the town men began constructing the frame of their new house. Just the basics, enough to have walls and a roof before the weather turned. The girls helped where they could, and Hannah watched from Ruth's porch as the skeleton of her future home took shape against the sunset. Violet had been welcomed by the other girls from Crenshaw's boarding house with the kind of fierce joy that came from shared survival. Hannah recognized 2 of them, Maggie with her crooked smile and Anna who sang. They surrounded Violet with hugs and questions and the easy intimacy of people who'd endured the same nightmare and come out the other side. They're going to be all right, Ruth said, appearing at Hannah's elbow with 2 cups of coffee. All of them. They've got each other, and they've got this town. That's more than most people get. Hannah accepted the coffee gratefully. I still can't believe it's real, that I'm here, that tomorrow I'm getting married. Believe it, you've earned it. Ruth was quiet for a moment, watching the construction work. I've seen a lot of women come through my boarding house over the years, running from something, running toward something, just running. Most of them keep running their whole lives because they never find a reason to stop. She looked at Hannah directly. You found your reason. Don't ever forget how rare that is. I won't, Hannah promised. The sunset faded to dusk, and Samuel came to say goodnight, paint spattered and exhausted, but smiling. The girls surrounded Hannah with hugs and demands that she tell them everything about the dress, and could they please do her hair tomorrow, and would there be cake? Yes to the hair, and Elena's baking something she promises will be spectacular, Hannah said, kissing each of them on the forehead. Now go with your papa and get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. Samuel lingered after the girls had piled into Ruth's second wagon for the ride to the construction site where they'd be camping for the night. He took Hannah's hands, studied her face in the lamplight. Having second thoughts? Not even for a moment. You? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally her mouth, soft and sweet and full of promise. I'll see you at the church tomorrow. Don't be late. Wouldn't dream of it. She watched him drive away, then turned to find Ruth and the other women watching her with various expressions of amusement. Come on, bride, Ruth said. We've got a dress to alter and hair to plan. Adelaide's waiting inside. The dress was beautiful. Ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, fitted bodice and full skirt that would have been fashionable in Boston but felt almost too elegant for a frontier wedding. But Adelaide insisted it was perfect, and the other women agreed, pulling Hannah into Ruth's bedroom for an impromptu fitting. They worked late into the night, taking in seams and adjusting the hem, arguing cheerfully about whether Hannah's hair should be up or down or braided. Violet proved to have a gift for needlework and helped Adelaide with the intricate alterations while Maggie and Anna planned flowers and music. Somewhere around midnight, Hannah looked around at these women, most of them strangers a month ago, some of them survivors of the same hell she'd escaped, and felt her throat tighten with gratitude. This was what family looked like when you built it yourself. Not blood, not obligation, but choice and shared survival and the fierce determination to make something good out of what you'd been given. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked. "All of you. For this. For everything." "Oh, don't you start crying," Maggie warned. "If you start, we'll all start, and then your eyes will be puffy tomorrow." But they were all crying anyway, happy tears that felt like healing. And when they finally declared the dress perfect and sent Hannah to bed, she lay awake in Ruth's guest room, staring at the ceiling and counting her blessings like prayers. Tomorrow, she'd marry Samuel McCord. She'd become mother to 5 girls who'd claimed her before she'd even realized she was being claimed. She'd start her new job with Adelaide, build a life in this town full of second chances, sleep in a house with no ghosts, and wake up every morning knowing she was exactly where she belonged. It felt impossible. It felt like a dream she'd have in that cage, something her mind would conjure to make the heat and hunger bearable. But when she finally slept, her dreams were full of white dresses and church bells, and a future so bright it hurt to look at directly. Morning came with ruthless efficiency. Ruth had Hannah up at dawn, fed and bathed, and settled in a chair while the women descended with flowers and hairpins and an alarming amount of opinions about eyebrows. The dress fit perfectly after last night's alterations, and when Hannah finally looked at herself in Ruth's full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, though the dress helped, and whatever Maggie had done with her hair was borderline miraculous, but because she looked happy. Actually, genuinely, radiantly happy, in a way she hadn't seen in her own reflection since before her parents died. "You're crying again," Anna observed. "Good tears this time," Hannah said, wiping her eyes carefully. "I promise." The walk to the church felt like floating. The whole town had indeed turned out. Families lined the street, children waved wildflowers, someone was playing violin somewhere nearby. Ruth walked beside her like a proud mother, and Violet and the other girls from the boarding house formed an impromptu honor guard, their faces bright with vicarious joy. The church doors opened, and Hannah saw Samuel standing at the front with Marcus Webb, who'd volunteered to officiate. Samuel wore his best suit, probably the same one he'd worn to Catherine's funeral, though he'd clearly pressed it and replaced the buttons. And when he saw Hannah, his face transformed with wonder. The girls sat in the front row, scrubbed and shining in their Sunday best. Mary was crying, Esther was grinning. Ruthie waved enthusiastically despite Mary's attempts to make her sit still. Hannah walked down the aisle on Ruth's arm, past friendly faces and well-wishers, toward the man who'd opened a cage door and changed everything. When she reached the front, Ruth squeezed her hand once and stepped aside, and Hannah took her place next to Samuel. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're biased," she whispered back. "Doesn't make it less true." Marcus cleared his throat, smiling. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Marcus spoke about partnership and choosing each other every day, about building families from love rather than obligation, about second chances and new beginnings. When it came time for vows, Samuel took Hannah's hands and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the church. "Hannah Brennan, you walked into my life when I'd forgotten what it meant to hope for anything beyond survival. You showed my daughters what strength looks like, what kindness looks like, what it means to keep going even when the world's tried to break you. I promise to protect you, to stand beside you, to build a future with you that's worthy of everything you've survived to get here. I promise to love you, not because you need saving, but because you're worth loving, today and every day for the rest of my life." Hannah's turn. She'd practiced this last night, but the words she'd planned fled in the face of Samuel's steady gaze and the weight of the moment. "Samuel McCord, you gave me back my freedom, and then you gave me something better, a reason to use it. You and your daughters taught me that family isn't what you're born into, it's what you build. That home isn't a place, it's people who choose you even when they don't have to." Her voice shook, but she pushed through. "I promise to love your daughters like they're my own, because they are. I promise to stand beside you when trouble comes, because it will. I promise to build this life with you, to make it good and true, and worth all the hard things we survived to get here. Today and every day, for as long as we both shall live." Marcus pronounced them married, and Samuel kissed her to cheers and applause that seemed to shake the church rafters. The girls swarmed them immediately, hugging and crying and declaring this the best day ever, and Hannah laughed through her tears and held them all as close as she could. The celebration afterward was everything a frontier wedding should be. Simple food made special by community effort, Elena's spectacular cake that turned out to be 3 layers with raspberry filling, music and dancing in the churchyard, toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Children ran wild, while adults talked and laughed, and as the sun began its descent, Hannah found herself pulled into a dance by Marcus Webb himself. "Welcome to Prospect Valley, Mrs. McCord," he said, "officially and permanently." Mrs. McCord. The name settled over her like a blessing. "Thank you for everything, for building this place." "We all built it. You included now." Marcus spun her expertly. "You know what you represent to this town? You and Violet and the others? You're proof that the system can fail and people can still survive. That mercy isn't weakness and second chances matter." He smiled. "We needed that reminder. We needed you." The dance ended and Samuel reclaimed her, pulling her close for a slower waltz while the violin played something sweet and melancholy. Around them, the town celebrated, but for a moment it felt like they were the only 2 people in the world. "Happy?" Samuel asked. "Deliriously. You?" "I didn't think I could be this happy again. After Catherine died, I thought—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought that was it. One great love in a lifetime and then just survival. But you proved me wrong. Catherine would want you to be happy. I know, and I think she'd like that it's you making me happy. You're both stubborn as hell." His smile was affectionate. "The girls are planning to sleep at Ruth's tonight. Something about giving us privacy, which means we have the construction site to ourselves." Hannah laughed. "How romantic! Sleeping under the stars with half-built walls." "I'll make it romantic, I promise." He did. After the celebration wound down and the guests departed with well wishes and promises to help finish the house tomorrow, Samuel led Hannah to their land. The frame was up, solid and true, with a canvas tarp stretched overhead for temporary shelter. He'd brought blankets and pillows, had even hung a lantern from one of the beams to cast warm light over their makeshift bedroom. "It's not much," he said, "but it's ours. It's perfect." And it was. This space that held nothing but possibility, no ghosts, no past, just the 2 of them, and the future they'd build together. They lay under the stars and talked for hours, about the girls, about the house they'd build, about Hannah's job with Adelaide and Samuel's plans to start a small herd. They talked about Violet and the other survivors, about making sure Prospect Valley stayed a place where people like them could heal. They talked until talking seemed less important than touching. And then they made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other with the kind of patience that came from knowing they had all the time in the world. Afterward, Hannah lay with her head on Samuel's chest and listened to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too." His arms tightened around her. "Thank you for saying yes, for staying, for choosing this. Thank you for seeing me, for fighting for me, for making me believe I deserve to be fought for." They fell asleep tangled together, and when morning came it brought the sound of children's laughter and the girls arriving early with breakfast and about a dozen questions about when the walls would be done and could they help paint and did being married feel different than being engaged. Samuel groaned and buried his face in Hannah's shoulder. "They're your daughters now, too. You deal with them." "Our daughters," Hannah corrected, kissing his temple, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." The next weeks were a whirlwind of building and settling in. The house went up quickly with help from the community. 4 bedrooms, a kitchen large enough for a family of 7, a front porch with a swing. Hannah started work with Adelaide and discovered she loved it, loved the precision of tailoring and the satisfaction of transforming fabric into something beautiful. The girls started school in the church basement, taught by a former professor from Pennsylvania who'd come west for his health. Samuel began building his herd with help from neighboring ranchers who appreciated his fair dealing and steady temperament. Violet found work at Elena's bakery and began the slow process of healing, supported by the other girls and the town's collective determination to prove that good people still existed. Deputy Marshal Blake stopped by occasionally with news. Emmett Crenshaw had been caught trying to cross into Mexico and was headed for trial. Silas had been sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. The remaining corrupt officials in Dust Creek were being systematically removed and replaced. Justice, it turned out, was possible when enough people demanded it. 6 months after the wedding, Hannah stood on her front porch watching Samuel teach Ruthie how to rope a fence post while the other girls did their evening chores. The house smelled like the roast Mary was cooking, and through the window she could see Esther setting the table while Sarah drew pictures and Abigail read aloud from a book she'd borrowed from their growing personal library. This was her life now. This collection of ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because she'd almost lost the chance to have them. Because she'd spent 5 days in a cage learning that the world was cruel, and then met a man who'd spent 8 years teaching his daughters that it could still be kind. Samuel caught her watching and smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip. He said something to Ruthie, who scampered off to help her sisters, and crossed the yard to join Hannah on the porch. "What are you thinking about? How far we've come. How different everything is." Hannah leaned into him, let him wrap his arms around her from behind. "A year ago I was running for my life. Now I'm standing on my own porch watching our daughters play." "Our daughters," Samuel repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "Me too." Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "Samuel McCord, you gave me everything I thought I'd lost. You gave me back my life. You did that yourself. I just opened the door." He kissed her forehead. "But I'm glad I was there to see you walk through it." The sun set over Prospect Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and Hannah Brennan McCord stood in the arms of the man